My memory of my childhood was sad. I always longed for the love of my mother, who passed away when I was 4, and whose face I don't remember, as she left no photograph. Tony DeLeon Pizarro. Tony DeLeon Pizarro, the man behind the uniform. How a poor and orphan boy from the Philippines achieved financial and philanthropic success in America, by Simeon G. Silverio, Jr. The greatest achievement of the human spirit is to live up to one's opportunities and make the most of one's resources. Vauvenargues, French philosopher, 1715–1747. Only in America, a dream come true. It was August 9, 2009, when Tony DeLeon Pizarro, a retired Filipino-American United States Navy supply officer, successful businessman and philanthropist, woke up in his brand-new Tuscan-style villa, a mansion he built at Fairbanks Ranch in Rancho Santa Fe, California, one of the most affluent and prestigious communities in the United States. He put on his robe, got off the bed, and stepped out of the spacious suite. His wife, Priscilla Santos Pizarro, a retired doctor of medicine, was still asleep. As he emerged from the room and on his way downstairs, he passed by the pictures of their grown children, Gerard and Wendy, hanging on the wall. Both are lawyers. Gerard has a successful legal practice in San Francisco and the CEO of Arc Anywhere, while Wendy, a Harvard University Juris Doctor graduate, chose to move back to San Diego from San Francisco, where she now specializes in trusts and estates. It was the last leg of a legal tour de force that began when she attended college at Yale University, stayed on for a master's degree, and then proceeded to Oxford University in Cambridge, England for another degree. Both exemplary and ambitious, brother and sister established a law firm named California Law Partners in San Diego, California. Tony grabbed a hot latte and sauntered out of the door to his beautiful backyard. Sitting in a lounge chair next to the swimming pool, he savored the cool morning air as sunlight poured through the trees. It was the family's first morning in the new house. For many people, the villa symbolizes the pinnacle of success. The extraordinary world-class estate is serene, spacious, and has sophisticated elegance. Hidden by its rustic surroundings, Rancho Santa Fe, the gated enclave Tony now called home, stuns the imagination with amenities that include a superb equestrian center, tennis courts, lake activities, a putting green, volleyball, children playground, jogging trails, and a 10,000-seat clubhouse equipped with kitchen facilities. One of the richest men in the United States has a property in the area because one of his daughters is an accomplished equestrian. A gift to his wife, the Pizarro Dream Home was conceived in the mind of Tony in the mid-70s. It was an exciting time to build the ultimate legacy. With the coveted land in the Pizarro's name, Tony became abuzz with ideas of how their home would look like. How many bedrooms and bathrooms? Or do they want a swimming pool or a basketball court with it? How big they would want their entertainment room to be. Not only that, the kids had grown up. Gerard was already in college while Wendy was still at the University of San Diego High School. How will they build? The pieces were falling in place and the plan coming together. Trip to Spain. But it would take a serendipitous trip to Spain to seal the character of the home with the Pizarro family coat of arms. In July of 2002, Tony participated with the running of the bulls in Ciudad Pamplona, Spain, and on his way back to Madrid, he traveled as far back in Ciudad Trujillo, to which King John II of Spain had commissioned Francisco Javier Pizarro to travel to South America, and where he became the conquistador of Peru. That was in 1643. During Tony's visit, he met the present older Pizarro family still living in the city of Trujillo. As a souvenir of his fortuitous visit, he brought home with him the Pizarro family coat of arms and family crest. He had the family crest, bearing 2 bears and a tree, signifying peace and sincerity, placed in every window of his house. While he could not prove direct lineage to the great historical figure, his family in Orion, Bataan in the Philippines, being poor farmers as far as his kinfolk could remember, he nonetheless claimed affinity by way of the shared last name. The Pizarro estate sits on a 1.5 acre of elevated land amongst other properties. It has a 14,000 sexaf of livable space to include a guest house. It has 8 bedrooms and 8.5 bathrooms, a luxurious home theater, a spacious chairman of the board library, a doctor's office, his wife being a physician, a putting green, a custom-built rock-heated swimming pool with a spa, a temperature-controlled wine room, a BBQ pit equipped with an open fire pit, 5 private patios, a 4-car garage, a covered entranceway, 4 elegant fireplaces, informal family rooms, private grandson rooms, a formal and informal dining room, an elegant formal receiving room. It also offers a private cigar lounge/patio and exercise pad. The house itself is equipped with sub-zero high-end appliances and 5 stations of air conditioning and heating units. Every room is wired for Wi-Fi, music, and intercom systems. A master builder of dreams, Tony had built a magical estate as his gift for his wife, Dr. Priscilla Santos Pizarro, for her continued support that spanned a lifetime of standing by her husband's impossible dreams that came true. Philanthropic endeavors. Tony Pizarro's success in business also enabled him to indulge in the family's philanthropic endeavors. In 2008, the family, with the help of other kababayans, Filipino countrymen, built the Santos Pizarro Gawad Kalinga village, giving care, donating 42 homes for the poorest of the poor in their hometown in Orphan, Bataan, in the Philippines. Gawad Kalinga is a nationwide social project headed by Tony Maloto that encourages people to build free housing for the poor in the Philippines, as well as in other parts of the world. In 2010, his wife Priscilla donated $100,000 to her alma mater, the University of Santo Tomas Medical School in Manila. The family's other charitable projects include the cleaning up of the Orion River in their hometown, the building of 2 Catholic chapels, the family's participation in free medical missions to the Philippines and Vietnam for 19 years, the cleaning up of the Bataan Death March markers, and the launching of multiple scholarships and book drives. On April 1, 2005, Tony was invited by the principal of his high school alma mater, Jose Rizal Institute, to be the guest speaker in its graduation ceremonies. Before the event, he asked for a quick tour of the school. After seeing the best classroom, Tony was taken to the worst room. The sight of his former classroom, where he spent many school hours, brought back many sad and fond memories to him. Tony sat down in the same desk assigned to him in high school and for a moment reflected on his high school days. Tears came out of his eyes. The principal and the staff watched in silence as Tony uttered to himself a thankful and solemn prayer to God, for he felt so lucky he was able to join the U.S. Navy, which enabled him to become a success while his other classmates were not. After the tour, Tony thanked the principal and her staff. As a gesture of gift-giving back, Tony gave her a 100,000 pesos check for the renovation and improvement of the school to make it more conducive to learning for the future students of his town. Another beneficiary of Tony and Priscilla Pizarro's philanthropy is the Divine Mercy Foundation of Southern California, whose mission is to build a Divine Mercy site in Encinitas, California. The couple donated over $75,000 and plan to donate more to the project. Their latest charitable endeavor is with Better Life for Better Future, BF, a social project that feeds, educates, houses, and mentors poor children, including those from indigenous tribes in the Philippines. BLBF is also training and mentoring the children in job skills and livelihood projects. The plan is to put up similar projects in the Pizarro hometown of Orphan, Bataan, financed by the Pizarro couple. Dirt poor. It is hard to imagine that Tony Pizarro was able to achieve these successes since he grew up quite literally dirt poor. He lost his mother when he was 4 years old. His father, already with 6 children of his own, remarried. She was also a widow who herself had 6 children. Still, the couple bore another child, Tony's stepsister Aure Pizarro, further increasing the brood and lessening resources. It was Brady Bunch before the popular TV show in the 1980s was aired. With so many mouths to feed in a household with already very limited resources, Tony ended up with whatever was left for him to eat, since the eldest in the brood always took the first crack at the food available and down the line. He was lucky whenever there were viand left for him, so oftentimes he had to flavor his rice with condiments, usually drops of patas fish sauce. He was transferred to the care of one relative to another until he became old enough to join the U.S. Navy, enabling him to take control of his own destiny. All he needed was a chance, which he embraced to the fullest with his talent, hard work, and perseverance. As a result of his industry and foresight, Tony was able to help himself and other people, and in the process achieve the ultimate American dream. Clouds of War. Born in the wrong place at the wrong time. 1940 was an auspicious year to be born. A war had been raging in Europe for almost 4 years. Adolf Hitler, with the army of the Third Reich, had invaded and conquered France and its neighboring countries. Although the United States had steadfastly tried to remain neutral, it was only 3 months after Tony Pizarro was born on September 10, 1940, in Orphan, Bataan, that the Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft would bomb Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and decimate the Pacific Fleet. The birth of a baby boy was supposed to be a moment of celebration. One doubts whether this was the case in the Pizarro household, since the poor father and his wife already had 5 children to feed and take care of. At that time, family planning and birth control were unheard of. The children were welcomed as they came, considered as they should be as blessings from God. Having a child, or as in the case of Tony's family, 6 children, was not a matter of choice, but that of destiny. It was typical for families then to have 5 to 12 children. How they were going to be fed and raised was a question not asked, for as always, they believe God will provide. Indeed, Tony Pizarro was born in the wrong place at the wrong time. The time of his birth was the beginning of the most horrific human experience in Philippines history, when millions of Filipinos would suffer atrocities, hardships, and death. His home province, Bataan, was ground zero of the Japanese military invasion and atrocities, the site of the infamous Bataan Death March. St. Tolentino. A father's love. The loud cry of a newborn baby was heard from a small house in Barangay Dang Balolo, Orphan, Bataan. The date, September 10, 1940. It was an inauspicious beginning for the baby boy, later to be known as Tony Pizarro. Dark clouds of the raging European war were threatening to engulf the world, including a small Pacific country called the Philippines, where Orphan is located. Just 3 months later, the American naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii would be bombed by the Japanese Imperial Army, which dragged America and its protectorate, the Philippines, into the conflict, signaling the start of the Second World War. The parents, Bernardo Sabino Pizarro and Esther Mateo de Leon, a poor fisherman, farmer, and housewife with little education, were already raising 5 small children, and the 6th would definitely add to the burden of feeding them all. The war and his family's poverty, plus the large number of siblings, had certainly given Tony a bad hand in life. It meant he would have had to pursue success at a disadvantage. As if this was not enough, his mother would soon die of malaria when he was 4 years old, literally leaving him to fend for himself. Indeed, if one was a betting man, one would not have given Tony a chance to succeed. At best, he would have been doomed to become a poor farmer like his ancestors and live in poverty for the rest of his life. And who would have ever thought that such a poor boy from a large family would one day end up a multimillionaire in America and the admired benefactor of several charities? And yet, to the surprise of many, he overcame the initial obstacles and achieved what was inconceivable of him. Patron saint of souls. Tony was christened Tolentino de Leon Pizarro. He was named after Saint Tolentino, the patron saint of the souls in the purgatory. At that time, Filipinos, who were mostly Catholics, named their children after saints. But Tolentino was not a common moniker, especially among the Filipinos. In fact, hardly anyone has heard of anybody named Tolentino. Nonetheless, it was the name his parents chose for him. How he ended up being called Tony Pizarro is an interesting story that would be told later. A mother without a face. A lonely childhood. Imagine yourself for one moment in your life not being able to see the face of your mother, not only in person, but also in a photograph. Would you spend the rest of your life trying to imagine what her face looked like in your mind, only to end up unable to do so? This must be a frustrating experience that hounded Tony Pizarro in the past. His only consolation was the picture of his Auntie Liwanag de Leon de la Cruz, which he always kept. She was his mother's sister, who, along with his Auntie Isabel Sabino Pizarro, took care of him as he was growing up in this world. He was 4.5 years old, too young to retain a memory, when Tony Pizarro's mother, Esther de Leon, died of malaria. It was liberation time, and the combined American and Filipino forces were pursuing the retreating Japanese army. Everything was in chaos. The Pizarro family had been forced to relocate and hide in the mountains during the bombing of their town by the Japanese troops. When it stopped, the family returned to their homes with lingering dark memories. In the devastation, no one took notice or cared enough to look for a keepsake for the youngest child, Tony. A treasured photograph of Esther, by which he could remember the face of his mother. Looking back, the feeling he was not that important in the scheme of things, or that he was not loved, maybe even ignored as the last of 6 children, must have crossed Tony's mind. Perhaps, too, the family simply could not help it. Photography was not easily available then, especially during wartime. Sadly, he was not able to hold on to the memory of one of the faces he ever gleaned when he first saw the light of the day. Tony was always alone when he was growing up because of the demise of his mother. At times, Tony would look at the relatives of his mother and imagine if any of them had a facial similarity to her. He would try to reconstruct her image from their faces, even though they were just half-sisters. To this day, he has kept his Auntie Liwanag's picture to remind him of what his mother, in all probability, must have looked like. "Your mother was a beautiful woman," his Auntie Liwanag once told Tony. "She was hard-working and had business acumen despite her limited formal education. She would buy several commodities, including rice, at wholesale price and sell and deliver them to her customers at retail price." Sometimes, Tony thought how she would have impacted his life had she lived long enough. One thing he would have wanted was for her to know how successful he had become. "I was so unhappy when I was a child, which gave me dark images of my past," Tony confessed. Added to this misfortune was the fact his father soon remarried to a widow, Lutgarda Valenzuela, who had 6 children of her own, increasing the brood the couple had to take care of to 12. Another child, Aurea, Tony's stepsister, was born of his father's recent marriage. "My memory of my childhood was sad," Tony remembers. "I always longed for the love of my deceased mother. Basically, I grew up like a gypsy or an orphan," Tony recalled. "Growing up, I saw my father as a likable man, very honest, kind-hearted, and had a well-balanced mind. I saw him from a distance, surrounded by his brothers, cousins, and friends as they enjoyed get-togethers in the afternoons in our humble house in Orion." Tony stayed with his Auntie Liwanag's family in Rosario, Cavite for 3 years, from 1951 to 1952, at a tender age of 9 years old. Tony's assigned sleeping space was the entrance porch or balcony outside the main house. Whenever it rained, misty rain from the outside of the windowless balcony would spray his face as he tried to get to sleep. This was because there was no space inside the house. The family had 7 kids of their own, which later increased to 9. Those enduring dark years, which still linger on in his mind, motivated him to pursue higher ambitions in life. There was no electricity or running water in their town when he was growing up. Gas lamps or gaseras made of a small bottle filled with kerosene and wick that protruded at the top would be used to find one's way around in the evening. There was no indoor plumbing. That's how I learned to be responsible. Without being told or asked, my daily task was to make sure that the banga, clay pot, was full of water. I would fetch water from a well outside the house and store them in a huge banga usually placed on a batalan, an open-air wet kitchen with bamboo slats for a floor that allowed water to wash down between the grooves and onto the pusoli or ground below. To relieve oneself, one had to go to the outhouse in the backyard, which was a good walk from the house. Sometimes one would go far away to the rice fields where no one could see him doing his business. Growing up, years like a bouncing ball. 1949 was one of the most unforgettable years of Tony Pizarro's youth. He was enrolled at the Cayetano Arellano Elementary School, about a mile away from their house in Orion, Bataan. The school was named after a native of the place who rose to become the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Still very young then, Tony remembers rushing to get ready for school, putting his shirt on, and picking up his books and papers without having breakfast most of the time. He would pass by the store of his Auntie Rita Almazan, a distant relative who would call out to Tony and tell him to tuck in his shirt and comb his hair. She and her family were very nice to the young Tony. At lunch break, he would come home from school very hungry. There was nobody at home, and with no refrigeration at that time, people would put their food inside a basket hanging from the ceiling to prevent cats from eating it. Most of the time, the basket was empty, and since there were no elders from whom he could ask money to buy food, he would content himself eating his usual staple of rice sprinkled with salt and water to appease his hunger. His mother must have been rolling in her grave, knowing the young son she left behind was being neglected. Name change. While living with the family, who by then had 7 children, Tony realized he should help them in return by doing household chores like cleaning the house, scrubbing the floor, and fetching water voluntarily and without being told. Never once did they tell me of things to do because I knew what was expected of me. In return, they complimented me for my efforts. The day in August 1954, when Tony Pizarro enrolled for his high school education at the José Rizal Institute, named after the country's national hero, was a significant moment in his life. It was the day his name was unceremoniously changed from Tolentino to Florentino. The culprit was Tony's own Auntie Mariquita Raimundo, a cousin of his father, who was then a Filipino language teacher there. She was also in charge of the students' registration. "Ang pangit naman ng pangalan mo. Your name is so ugly," she said when he approached her desk. "Tolentino is not appropriate for you. People might call you Tole, a circumcised person, and you would end up the butt of the jokes of your fellow students. Let's change it to a better-sounding name like Florentino, so people could also call you Tino." Tony, who was told to be obedient to elders, liked the idea and agreed. Hence, his name was changed for good, without seeking the approval of his father or registering the change of name in the municipal hall. It seemed it could be done, since the records of names in the birth registry had been burned during the Japanese occupation in the Second World War. It would not be the last time Tony would change his name. When he arrived in the United States in May of 1959, the American movie actor Tony Curtis was very popular. He thought by changing his nickname to Tony instead of Tino, he would become as successful as his movie idol. And so, throughout his military and civilian career, he introduced himself as Tony. Tony did well in high school. He was elected class president each year and named the most serviceable person of the year in 1956. From 1957 to 1958, his senior year, Tony was elected president of the Student Council and handpicked by Mr. Andres Buenaventura, the school's preparatory military training instructor, PMT, as battalion commander. He was also with the school's champion debate team, as well as the winner of the school's oratorical contest. His winning piece? José Rizal's classic poem, My Last Farewell. He graduated from high school in March 1958. Somehow, Tony managed to do well in school at this point of his life, despite feeling like a bouncing ball, one who was passed around from one family member to another. He had no permanent roots. As a high school graduate, he did not know yet what the next chapter of his life would be. A short-lived college education. The would-be doctor. Many young boys grow up wanting to be a doctor. As far as he could remember, Tony wanted to become one. But he was poor, an orphan who had to learn how to fend for himself even at a young age. There was no way he could fulfill his goal, which felt like a fantasy. For how could he afford a medical degree, which even today is the most expensive postgraduate diploma anyone could pursue? Although his elder brothers had joined the United States Navy and were enjoying a lucrative income compared to the local workers, they had gotten married and had their own financial responsibilities and could not fully be counted on for financial support. For Tony, at that time, pursuing a medical degree was totally impossible. It was like reaching not for, but beyond the stars. Truly, he had reached a critical crossroad in his lifetime, and he did not know what to do. Then he made an abrupt decision. Without seeking the permission of his elders, he joined the Bosnig fish trawler owned by his uncle Jeremias Apolinario and his family. He thought if he were to ask permission, he would be denied anyway, so he went nonetheless with his childhood friend and cousin, Abraham Apolinario, the son of his uncle Jeremias. At this stage in life, he was hungry for more challenges and wanted to experience what he thought would be an exciting adventure while figuring out what to do next. One night, a crewman caught in the net an apple floating on the sea. It must have been dropped overboard from a United States naval vessel operating in that region. It was not unusual to find something dropped from an American combatant ship, as it was close to the Subic naval base. He gave it to the boat captain, who very carefully divided it into 12 pieces and gave each crew a share. This little piece of apple incident became very important in Tony's life, for sharing things with others is one of God's teachings. It was the first time he remembered he had ever tasted the sweetness of an apple. It was delicious, a taste of equal sharing he could never forget for the rest of his life. It taught me how to share things and follow commands, Tony recalled. Years later, after I had retired from the Navy during the summer of 2016, and while I was with my family on an Asian cruise ship visiting Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Philippines on a vacation, I bought a dozen apples from the shore and threw them to the water while passing the Philippine seas, hoping they would bring the same joy and delight I experienced as a young man. Tony claims he is now living his second life. When he was a child during the summer of 1956, he was invited by a classmate and friend to ride a boat and swim next to a sunken Japanese tanker left by the Japanese Army during the Second World War on the ocean in front of their hometown in Orphan, Bataan. While swimming in the choppy waters with his friends, Tony passed just inches away from the ship's motor razor blade. It was a miracle of God he went in a different direction. He could have died had he hit the sharp blade. He was convinced that God was looking after him. It was not meant for Tony to die after all. Unknown to Tony, his auntie Isabel, sister Ada, and other relatives were worried and searching for him. By asking other relatives, they figured out he must have joined his cousin Abraham Apolinario in the latter's family-owned Basnig. As they asked around, they found out he left to join the Basnig fleet and found his boat docked in Barrio Calapacuan, Subic Bay, along with Abraham Apolinario. To appease Tony, they promised that he could enroll at the Far Eastern University in Manila the following semester to pursue his medical degree. But life was hard for Tony during those early years of his short college life. He had limited funds and could barely even come home to visit his beloved hometown, Orion, on special holidays and spend Christmas with his family. Sometimes, he would have barely enough coin change in his pocket. When he asked for money from his father to cover his matriculation fees, books, and his daily expenses for the next semester, Tony vividly remembered the moment when his father paused for a while and then summoned his stepmother to ask her to borrow money from somebody else. To save money, he transferred to the apartment of his cousin Remedios Reyes and her husband Kuya Carding Reyes in Caloocan for free lodging when he returned to Manila. It was far from the school, but he could extend his limited budget. Tony always thought and finally realized his family could not possibly afford to send him further to medical school after all, when, the next time he went home, he overheard his parents again talking about where they could borrow money for his expenses. He knew his education was taking a heavy financial toll on them. His father's desire for his youngest son Tony to become a doctor, perhaps to make up for his years of neglect of him, put him in denial. His father was too proud to admit he could not afford to cover the expenses of the course. Unbeknownst to his father and his family, Tony decided to take his chances by applying to join the United States Navy at the recruiting station at the U.S. Naval Station in Cavite City, just like his elder brothers and hometown friends before him. He thought he would be different. That, for once, somebody in their family would utilize his God-given gifts and talent to pursue a profession of his choice, which was medicine. But looking at the reality of their financial situation, it was clear that it was impossible for him to finish the course. He had to accept the fact that he was not meant to be a doctor. However, over the years he proved to them he made the right choice for his Navy career, ultimately became the vehicle that made him rich and enabled him to help a lot of people through his philanthropic endeavors. All these feats could not be achieved even if he indeed became a doctor, for he had financially surpassed the rewards of the revered profession. Paradoxically, while fate denied him the fulfillment of a medical career, he somehow gained first-hand insight into a doctor's life by marrying one. A father's confession. Following the lead of his elder brothers and other town mates, the young Tony Pizarro submitted an application to the United States Naval Recruiting Station at Sangley Point, Cavite City in the province of Cavite. It was mid-January of 1959. After a few weeks, he received a calling card through the mail at his cousin Remedios Reyes' apartment in Caloocan and was told to report on February 10, 1959, a Monday. Tony, upon receiving notice, went to the Quiapo Catholic Church next to the Far Eastern University, where he was enrolled, and prayed to God that if he would be accepted and pass all the requirements, he would help his family, his country, and above all, serve God. Each day that passed before the United States Navy exam date, Tony attended a Catholic Mass and silently prayed for his fervent dreams of not only being able to help his family, but also help the poorest of the poor, and, if possible, build an income-generating commercial building in his hometown. Those dreams many years later became a reality. He has built a 4-story building with commercial units on the first floor, apartments on the second floor, hotel rooms on the third floor, and a restaurant on the 4th floor overlooking the Orion River. The building complex is named Jerry and Wendy Building, after his children. It is located in the heart of Orion, Bataan. In 2008, he funded, along with friends, a 42-unit free housing project for the poorest of the poor in his hometown. It was under the auspices of Gawad Kalinga Giving Care, a project headed by Tony Maloto, its president and founder. On February 10, 1959, there were about 200 applicants waiting outside the main gate of the U.S. Naval Base Sangley Point, Cavite City. The gate was opened at 8 a.m., and a U.S. Marine Sergeant Guard told the applicants to line up like a battalion company and march towards a Quonset hut recruiting office building about quarter miles away. After a simple briefing by the officer in charge, the applicants were told they had 3 hours to complete the test. The rigorous written exams consisted of basic simple math, English comprehension, and logic. The man in charge was a Caucasian American named Lieutenant Junior Grade G. F. Todd, who appeared to be a very strict disciplinarian. That was the first time Tony met a white American. He felt very scared as he never spoke or heard English regularly. He could hardly understand the language. Todd told the applicants only the best would be admitted. That out of the 200, only 10 would pass. After the exams were corrected, those whose names were called were told to assemble outside the building with the Marine Guard and to march back to the main gate. They were the ones who did not pass the test. About 50, including Tony, were left. That same day, the 50 left behind underwent comprehensive personal interview examinations. They were tested on their ability to communicate in English. Each one was called into a room and was told to answer a direct question. Their answers would determine whether they would pass or fail. It was a simple question, but since it was the first time Tony was questioned by a Caucasian American, he felt very nervous. He was so afraid of facing and talking to a white American. He thought that all white Americans were supreme beings. He almost failed due to the interviewer's misunderstanding of his response. The question was, "What's inside your left-hand breast pocket?" Tony's response, "A handkerchief." "Sir?" The interviewer thought he was guessing. He was told to leave the room because his answer was deemed to be wrong. One incorrect response would doom Tony's life forever. But Tony was not born to give up that easily. The stakes for him were so high, he would not let a simple misinterpretation of his response ruin his future. He wanted to show his willingness to do anything to pass, and his aggressiveness to get in the Navy. "Sir, my answer is correct," he told the interviewer. To prove that he was correct, Tony pulled out a handkerchief from his breast pocket. The interviewer realized Tony was indeed right. He was amazed by his confidence to quickly respond to the question. He could indeed comprehend the English language correctly. With great relief, Tony was given another card, ordering him to report back the following Monday, March 3, 1959, for his physical examination. "Thanks be to God," he exclaimed to himself. "That was the luckiest day of my life. Only 10 were supposed to be allowed in. I was the 11th, as they made an exception to their rule." Tony was the happiest person on earth. In the morning of March 3, 1959, all of them that had passed lined up at the main gate of the U.S. Naval Station, Sangley Point, Cavite City, Cavite, and marched with a Marine Guard escort towards the Navy dispensary where the physical exams were to be held. Tony was given a complete physical examination that would include chest x-rays, dental, physical body conditions, weight and blood pressure exams. But Tony only weighed 100 pounds and was worried he might not meet the required weight limit. His grandmother, named Camilla, who lived with his Auntie Liwanag, advised and reminded him to eat a dozen saba bananas before showing up for the physical exams. She also told him not to discharge his bowels until after his physical exams were over. Tony asked, "Why?" "They will add to your weight," he was told. It was late in the afternoon when the recruiting officer announced that the 11 men who were present had passed the physical exams. They were told to come back on March 19, 1959, the following Monday, for the oath-taking and loyalty certificate signing, thus completing in this final act their formal acceptance in the U.S. Navy. Tony heard the good news he had been aspiring for. They were told to go home and say goodbye to their families as they were now official recruits and members of the United States Navy. Tony was given an important document for his father to sign, signifying the latter's consent for his son to join the U.S. Navy. Tony then went to Manila and dropped all of his classes at the Far Eastern University, packed all his small belongings, and said goodbye to his family and friends. He then visited his father and other family members immediately to tell them the good news. He was proud of his feat as others, like his older brother Seferino and older cousin Mike, had been trying to pass the same tests for many years to no avail. However, Tony's father refused to give his consent. He wanted his son to finish his medical studies and become a doctor of medicine. After an in-depth discussion with his father, Tony was so devastated he sought the help of his Auntie Isabel, the younger sister of his father, to convince him to sign the papers. Tony's father still insisted that Tony continue with his impossible dream. After many hours of convincing, his father agreed to let him go. It would be good for him, his Auntie Isabel told his father. Your son could not be dissuaded, as we all know he has a strong character, big ambition, is more self-driven, and has the character to succeed compared to others. And, let's face it, it would be difficult for you financially to send him to an expensive medical school. Reluctantly, his father swallowed his pride and accepted the fact his youngest son, on whom he pinned his hope of having a medical doctor among his children, would never become one. Tony shared the good news with his cousin, Gregorio Pizarro, a U.S. Navy sailor himself who happened to be on vacation in the Philippines and was visiting his Auntie Isabel at that time. Kuya Orio, as I called him, was my favorite cousin during my growing up years. Each time he visited my Auntie Isabel during his vacation, he never failed to meet with me along with his pretty wife, Ate Normita. I remember vividly his words of wisdom when he told me to become a member of the organization, Brother Mason, which I obeyed years later. In accordance with the Filipino practice of gift-giving, his cousin Gregorio Pizarro pulled out his wallet and handed Tony a $5 bill. "This is my gift to you, and we welcome you in your chosen career. May God be with you always and good luck," he told Tony. That kind gesture was never forgotten by Tony the rest of his life. To this day, Tony still has the $5 bill. The day before he left on March 17, 1959, Tony visited his father to say goodbye. The old man pulled him aside and told his son to sit down as he had something important to say. It took a while for him to compose himself, for he was about to say something he was not proud of that happened many years before. He started with an incident during the Second World War when the Japanese Imperial Army occupied the Philippines. Tony had heard about the horrific war stories when the Japanese army went to Orion in search of men who helped the Americans and the Filipino guerrilla resistance movement. Men caught were gathered in the town plaza, while a hooded Japanese collaborator pointed at those he said were aiding the Americans and the guerrillas. It was known earlier in the day that the Japanese would arrive unannounced and search for the men. They forcefully entered the home of a suspect and looked in every room of the house. Tony's father confessed it was during that moment when he hid himself inside a closet with his youngest son, Tony, in his arms. Tears flowed down from his father's eyes when he told Tony that had the young boy make a noise that might result in their discovery by the Japanese, his father was ready to save his own life and let his son die of suffocation. It was a heartbeat confession to remember for Tony. Rather than be captured, be executed, or beheaded with the dreaded Japanese samurai sword, his father's thought of his 5 other children to leave behind, as they would suffer tremendously if he was gone. Hence, he chose his youngest son Tony to be the sacrificial lamb. Somehow my father had been carrying that guilt ever since, Tony remembers. He was so thankful to God I kept quiet and did not make a noise. A miracle just happened. Tony just sat there in silence as his father teared up while trying to make peace with son. The new U.S. Navy recruit never been happier. It was March 18, 1959, early Sunday morning, when Tony left Orion Bataan aboard the local La Mallorca bus bound for Manila. He then transferred to another bus named Saulog Transit, bound for Cavite City. Tony left home with a bag full of dreams that he has been secretly nurturing for many years, with a promise he made to himself with God's help to be the best amongst all ages. He arrived in Cavite City and spent the night with his auntie Liwanag, who had relocated to the place. The following day, March 19, 1959, Tony arrived at 8 in the morning at the U.S. Naval Station in Cavite City, Cavite. As scheduled, all 11 of the new recruits met and marched towards the recruiting office and officially took the oath to enter the United States Navy. After a series of indoctrinations, each one of them was issued 4 sets of dungaree uniforms. They joined the other sailors who were recruited months before them. For the first time in his life, Tony had his own fitted shoes, with socks, not one dangling or borrowed, 8 pairs of shirts, 8 pairs of underpants, and a pair of athletic shoes with socks to go with it. And for the first time also, he slept on a bed with a mattress. They were then taken to their berthing spaces called Recruit Enlisted Barracks, while they waited for a military transport ship to arrive from America to take them to the United States. The recruits assembled each time before heading towards the general mess hall where they ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Tony was amazed with the mess hall's cleanliness and display of food selections available. They always started with a main entree of meat, pork, chicken, or fish, followed by side dishes of potatoes and vegetables, then salads, and finally a choice of dessert. The drinks were aplenty, with all kinds of soda, water, coffee, and tea offered on a help-yourself basis. The chow line was unbelievable in length, about 24 feet long, and the food was ample enough to satisfy everyone. And everything tasted great. It was Tony's first time to see the chow line, a mind-boggling banquet of delicious dishes spread enticingly on a serving counter of epic proportions. Tony and his fellow Filipino-American mates went at it with gusto, even capping the meal with the shared childhood memory of sweetening their glass of chilled milk with sugar, which drew laughter from others. And why not? The recruits were simply following the sign that said, "Help yourself to as much as you want." But the chow line also had its mishaps. Tony took a lot of ice cream on the serving line, not knowing it was mayonnaise. When Tony tasted it, it was sour. It was at that time when a white American guard on duty, who was watching over them, announced with a loud voice, "Everyone should eat whatever they had taken from the chow line. No wasting of food. All must be eaten, otherwise you'll have to face the consequences." Tony was so shaken by the warning and feared he could be discharged if he were to throw away his leftovers. Therefore, he forced himself to eat all the mayonnaise he took, only to throw it up later in the bathroom commode. Tony would always volunteer himself for working parties, even though he was seasick like a dog. His aim was to learn as many jobs as he could possibly do. Whenever a volunteer was asked, he always raised his hands as high as he could. He never appeared to be scared and always welcomed each day's challenge. That probably set him apart from others. As the ship passed the famous Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, Tony was so impressed by the magnificent beauty of the buildings ahead and the surrounding natural landscape. Breathing the sea breeze of America and the crisp coolness of its air was so compelling, it rekindled the imagination of the eager young man with the big dream. The ship docked at the U.S. Naval Station in Treasure Island, a small man-made island between the city of San Francisco and the city of Alameda, for their final stop. The recruits were then taken off the ship and brought to the enlisted receiving barracks for a few days' stay. He heard for the first time the Star-Spangled Banner national anthem being played every morning by the U.S. Navy Band during the 8 a.m. flag-raising ceremonies. The first time he got off the ship, he uttered a solemn prayer. "Today is the happiest day of my life," Tony told himself upon his arrival in America. His first course of action after getting off the ship was to go down on his knees and kiss the American soil and say, "Thanks be to God for allowing me to enter the land of the free and a new world of opportunity. Amen." Later that evening, his eldest brother, Ernesto, came to see him at the barracks and brought him to Manila Cafe on Kearny Street in the city of San Francisco. That was where Filipino sailors hung out during their liberty to have a taste of Filipino dishes. He had his first Filipino meal in America. He saw the tall buildings of San Francisco. With a heart overflowing with gratitude, he would always make a reverent sign of the cross whenever he passed by, imposing buildings thinking they were Catholic churches, although he wondered why there were no religious statues outside. He also noticed the different modes of transportation, like buses, cars, underground subways, trains, and airplanes. He was amazed to see the various tones of skin of white Americans and their different colors of hair, like blonde, brunettes, redheads, and others. Seeing them for the first time in his life made him think he was on a different planet. Tony tried quickly to improve his English-speaking skill by studying the proper idioms, slang, colloquialism, and grammar. He loved to read books during his spare time and copy newscasters like Walter Cronkite, Huntley and Brinkley, Regis Philbin, and many others. He even confessed he tried to talk to the posts for practice at times, although the posts did not answer back. For the first time in his life, Tony saw with his own eyes the racial divide, prejudice, and discrimination by the white Americans against the black Americans. On their first stop in Phoenix, Arizona, he noticed that at every stop at the Greyhound station, there were signs on the front doors for colored only and whites only. Not knowing the racial history of America, Tony was confused as he was wearing a Navy uniform. After going back and forth on which door to use, the black bus driver called his attention and told him to use the whites-only door because Tony was not colored. He was also afraid to order food as he was not yet used to the English language. Again, the same bus driver was good enough to help him order the food, which were mostly hamburgers. He also told him to eat his meal at the whites-only section, for again, he was not considered colored. It took him several more stops on the road to learn the hard lesson about race from person of color and the meaning of segregation. He was so curious about racial prejudice that he read books later in life on how hard it was for blacks to endure life in America for hundreds of years, and what the passing of the Emancipation Proclamation and other civil rights amendments in Congress have meant to racial relations and equality in America. Key mistakes. Those were not the only rookie mistakes Tony committed during his initiation into Navy life and the right of survival American style. Having come from a remote barrio in a third-world country like the Philippines, the modern-day amenities that it lacked in the early 1960s became a source of bewilderment to Tony wherever he saw these technological wonders in the public space in a modernized United States. He always thought it was a miracle of God each time he encountered them. Among his misconceptions were, he thought that television sets were meant to be turned on only by white Americans, as he could not do it himself, not knowing that a remote control could do the trick. He was surprised to see garage doors opening by themselves, again not knowing that remote controls make them do so. He thought that drinking fountains at buildings and airports only worked for white Americans. He was surprised to see water shooting out of a drinking fountain whenever a white American merely stooped over it. When he tried to do the same himself, nothing happened. He tried to do so several times until he concluded that the device worked for white Americans only. Later on, he found out that one had to press a button with his hands or knee to make the water fountain work. He thought that Brill Cream hair pomade was toothpaste. He used it as one for many months. He thought all the tall buildings in America were churches because back in the remote barrio where he came from, the only big edifice was a church. He always made the sign of the cross whenever he passed by a building. That the reason why white Americans were white was because they always took hot showers. There were no hot showers back home in the Philippines. The first time he tried one, he got a second-degree burn. He didn't know the temperature could be adjusted by mixing together the hot and cold water. He didn't want to be near a telephone. He was afraid it might ring, and he might be forced to answer it and embarrass himself in the process, for he was not familiar with American slang. When an officer asked for an ashtray because he was smoking, Tony gave him the trash can. He didn't know there was such a thing as a tray used purposely for cigarette ashes alone. When some Filipino stewards cooked fried rice and dried fish, a Caucasian officer asked Tony, "What's for breakfast?" He replied, "Sinangag at tuyo," Filipino words for fried rice and dried fish. He thought he was still in the Philippines and talking to a fellow Filipino. Welcome to America. Courtship in Boston. A Tale of 5 Suits. While in Boston, Massachusetts in the late 1960s, Tony met a fellow sailor at the YMCA who told him about a lady working at the Jewish Memorial Hospital by the name of Priscilla Santos from his hometown in Orion, Bataan. He gave him her phone number, and Tony called her to say hello. She sounded so friendly, enthusiastic, and had a golden voice, Tony remembered. The two seemed eager to meet each other. Initially, Tony thought she was a nurse until she corrected him and said she was a doctor who graduated from the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. Tony visited her in a borrowed suit, a flower in hand, and a small box of chocolate candy. Although they were both from Orion, they had never met before. Priscilla spent most of her time in school in Manila. She was born in Barangay Wawa, which was close to the ocean, while Tony was born in Barangay Dangbilolo, which was close to the mountains of Orion. During the summer of 1956, there was a fire one morning that started at the family home of Priscilla in Wawa. It was common for people at that time to gather their trash daily and burn them when they piled up. There were no garbage collectors then. One morning, while the trash was being burned, strong winds blew the ambers high, burning the nipa hut houses in the area. The fire burned almost a quarter of the town, leaving at least more than 800 families homeless. The barangay communities affected were Dangbago, Lusungan, and Kapunitan. Tony's father, Bernardo Sabino Pizarro, was then a councilman assigned to her district. It was rumored that since the fire started at the Priscilla Santos home, the Santos family should pay for all the damages caused by the fire. It resulted to a big family feud between the Santos and Pizarro families. The incident was never forgotten, although the demand to pay was never pursued and discussed further. The barangay communities affected were Dangbago, Lusungan, and Kapunitan. Tony's father, Bernardo Sabino Pizarro, was then a councilman assigned to her district. It was rumored that since the fire started at the Priscilla Santos home, the Santos family should pay for all the damages caused by the fire. It resulted to a big family feud between the Santos and Pizarro families. The incident was never forgotten, although the demand to pay was never pursued and discussed further. In view of the feud, Priscilla's father did not approve of the relationship between Tony and Priscilla. He ordered his daughter to break up with Tony. Like an obedient daughter, Priscilla informed Tony that she was quitting her job to relocate to another state and she will never return to Boston. Upon Tony's return from a 6-month deployment in Europe, he called Priscilla only to find out she was still at the hospital. Due to his deep love for her, a continuing courtship started again. It was a big challenge for Tony as other doctors were pursuing her as well. She must also have a deep love for Tony, for she chose him over her other suitors. When Priscilla asked Tony what his rank in the U.S. Navy was, he told her he was a TN. She was very happy because she thought it meant teniente, the Tagalog word for lieutenant in the Philippines. Tony just kept quiet, for he did not lie to her. It was only after they got married that she found out the truth. They had fun each time he visited her, until on Valentine's Day in 1962, he proposed marriage, which she accepted joyfully. During the courtship, Priscilla was impressed to see Tony wearing a different color of suit whenever they met. Unbeknownst to her, Tony had 4 other sailor friends, with the same coat size as him, with whom he shared 5 suits whenever they visited their girlfriends. The suits were stored in a locker at the local YMCA. All 5 friends had a duplicate key to open the unit as they alternately wore the suits. Tony was invited by Priscilla to attend a doctor's Christmas party. He accepted the invitation, provided he be introduced also as a doctor. Whenever they asked me about the new medicine mentioned in the latest issue of the medical journal, I pretended not to hear the question and excused myself to use the bathroom. That way, he could stay away from the conversation and avoid being exposed. Whenever they were invited to a doctor's party, Tony was always the first to get food or dance with Priscilla. He never showed shyness to anyone. One Friday evening, Tony saw one boyfriend of a Filipino doctor at a YMCA dance. Tony and the guy tried to avoid each other, but later they could not help but acknowledge each other's presence. They had a good laugh when they realized they were both pretending to be a doctor. In the end, they agreed to keep their secret to themselves. Tony asked permission from his commanding officer, Albert Monroe Sackett, to take a leave as he was scheduled to marry his fiancée, Priscilla, in Boston, Massachusetts on June 23, 1962. However, Tony returned to his ship when Priscilla canceled the wedding plans. Her father heard about the planned matrimony from the pulpit during a Sunday Mass and was blindsided. He was in the pews when the parish priest at St. Michael's Church in Orion announced that Priscilla and Tony were to tie the knot on June 23, 1962. Understandably, her father became fuming mad and left without saying goodbye to his family. Because of this, Priscilla sent Tony a telegram canceling the wedding. The second time the couple planned to marry, they were supposed to meet in downtown Boston and proceed to the city hall to get a marriage license. However, each waited at different corners of Boston Avenue and Massachusetts Avenue and failed to see each other. Priscilla once again called off the wedding. The third time for the couple was a charm. This was despite the fact that Priscilla flatly told Tony her family was vehemently opposed to the marriage and she must abide by their decision. This time Tony was ready for her objection. Tony's brother Ernie and his 2 cousins, Pablo Pizarro and Mike Pizarro, came with him. They both pleaded with the prospective bride to reconsider the wedding. After so many hours of discussions, she agreed. Tony and Priscilla's wedding was held on June 23, 1962, at the Basilica of the Mother of Perpetual Help Catholic Church in Boston, Massachusetts, on the original date they had set for the wedding. On their way to their honeymoon, Priscilla noticed Tony had 1 coat in his suitcase. "Where are the others?" she asked. Tony sheepishly confessed he was only sharing the others' suits with his friends. By then, Tony was no longer worried about her disappointment. She could not back out as their marriage was a done deal. He just vowed he would make up for his misrepresentation by mustering all his energy to make her the happiest girl in the world despite borrowing 4 other suits. In hindsight, even though Tony did not achieve his dream of becoming a doctor, having a wife who was a physician gave him an idea into the lifestyle. Navy family Tony was selected to become Chief Petty Officer in May 1971 to relieve Master Chief Jim Edgar as officer in charge of the Food Service Division. Tony's position as the officer in charge assigned as Food Service Officer later helped him in his career. He gained a lot of friends among the officers who were eating there. One day, during the summer months in 1973, some boatswain's mates informed him that there were a lot of paints being given away. They were supposed to be used in the painting of ships, but since many were being decommissioned, excess paints were accumulated. The leading chief of the boat, C.H. Boss, asked, "Would you like to have some paint, Tony?" "Of course," Tony replied. He thought of applying a fresh coat of paint to the building. Not only would it make the building look clean and beautiful, the cans of paint, more importantly, were free. The Navy did not have to spend anything. He requested a Mr. Miller, the shipyard bus driver, to lend him some spray paint guns to use. The two became good friends as the driver used to have his coffee at the mess hall. He also helped deliver the paints to Tony. The paints, which were of different colors, were mixed together by Tony and other volunteers. Unfortunately, after spray painting the buildings, the mixture dried to a shade of pink. And it didn't stop with the buildings. A dozen cars parked near the buildings were also the beneficiaries of the paint job blown by the wind from the sprayer. The car owners filed a complaint with the commanding officer, who was aghast to see the pink-colored building. One is reminded of the movie Operation Petticoat in 1959, where Cary Grant and Tony Curtis found themselves stuck in a decrepit pink submarine. Tony, Pizarro, that is, not his idol Tony Curtis, was told the galley, Navy term for mess hall, was covered by the Naval Facility Manual that required the use of approved colors for government buildings. The commanding officer, executive officer, supply officer, and administrative officer summoned Tony and told him of the complaint charges. Tony told them he didn't know about the paint code, and all he wanted was to do a good deed outside of his job description. He pleaded guilty to the charges, although he meant no malice. Later on, he was surprised and puzzled when he was told he was being considered to become a member of the Navy Food Management Team in San Diego for his next duty assignment. He was also informed he was the first of Filipino descent to be admitted for such an assignment. He was then directed to report back to the Service School Command at NTC San Diego, California, to study and become an instructor at commissary school. He told everybody he already attended the same school. Years later, Tony theorized they must have wanted to hide him during the investigation of the pink paint fiasco until he got his official transfer order to the Navy Food Management Team, also in San Diego. But that was just his speculation, not proven by facts. "You're no longer in command, Pizarro," he was told. "I want you to pack your bag and go back to school in San Diego." He now believes if one does a good job, one would be cared for by the Navy. The command also recommended that Tony apply for the Limited Duty Officer program to further boost his career as a commissioned supply officer. Tony's skill and expertise in his job was demonstrated when thousands of Vietnamese refugees arrived in San Diego. The Navy was required to feed them, but the officers didn't know how. Tony, together with the other U.S. Marines food service officers, was invited to a meeting at Camp Pendleton Marine Corps Base in Oceanside, California. The meeting was presided over by the Camp Commandant General Graham. "What should we feed them?" the general asked the group. Tony raised his hands and said, "We Asians only eat meat, pork, poultry, and fish with rice. I strongly recommend a 7-day menu cycle for the purpose of easy accountability and responsibility." The general was impressed with Tony's recommendation. He assigned him to head the project. A few days thereafter, Operation New Life was launched, and Camp Pendleton started receiving refugees arriving from Vietnam and other refugee camps in Guam, Philippines, and Singapore. They were fed breakfast, lunch, and dinner for an output of over 42,000 meals a day, without any problem. Years later, when Tony was talking about this incident, his son Gerard realized that his wife Tina, who is now a registered nurse, with her 4 other sisters and their parents, might have been among the refugees fed by Tony in that camp. She was a young girl then, and she remembered staying at Camp Pendleton upon their arrival as refugees from Vietnam and being fed at the mess hall set up for them. A crowning achievement. Tony Pizarro's historic role. Tony Pizarro did not only serve in the U.S. Navy, finish his contract, and comfortably retired just like the thousands of his fellow recruits from the Philippines. Not only did he rise from the ranks to become an officer, establishing a record among his peers in the speed at which he was promoted. More importantly, he made a very drastic and important contribution in the operation of the Navy, a systemic change that benefited thousands of stewards, mostly Filipinos, who came after him. He was the one responsible for the removal of the outdated and unfair elements in the job description that denote the menial and sometimes degrading tasks of steward ratings. In September of 1974, Tony was summoned to attend a conference that aimed to combine the commissary rating, CS, and the steward rating, SD, into one post to be called the new Mess Management Specialist, MS. It was one of the highlights of Tony's career. He was handpicked to become a member of the Commissary and Steward Merger Panel at the Bureau of Naval Personnel in Washington, D.C. The panel was composed of 4 commissary men and 4 steward men. They were to make recommendations for composing the job description of the new position of Mess Management Specialist Rating, MS. It was known among the higher-ups that Tony was a former steward who had become a commissary man. They were two different career paths, parallel to each other. But Tony had a chance to occupy both posts. His superiors felt that he could give significant insights to the discussion due to his personal experiences in both fields. He was fully qualified for the task and carried a big voice. When he spoke, everybody listened since he was the only one among them who worked as a steward. Secretly, Tony told himself that they picked the wrong guy, for he was hell-bent on changing the rules to benefit the incoming stewards, mostly newly recruited Filipinos. He was determined to spare his fellow Filipinos from suffering the ignominy he experienced as a young steward. The panel discussions centered on the readiness of incoming Filipino recruits to become future food service officers, and to work as department heads and to acquire personal leadership skills. What made their task urgent was the prevailing climate of inequity towards the Filipino and Black American recruits, making them susceptible to abuse by their officers. During the discussions on the proposed job description of the new post, Mess Management Specialist Rating, it was Tony who was very vocal in making important changes while the others remained quiet. He made strong recommendations of doing away with the menial tasks of shining shoes, cleaning up the officers' staterooms, carrying the officers' uniforms to the laundry, making up beds for officers, and at times walking the admiral's dogs when assigned to their private quarters. He battled hard to assign Filipino Americans to leadership positions and increased promotion percentages to the new mess management ratings. His recommendations were well accepted and eventually approved, changing forever the lives of thousands of mostly Filipino American and African American stewards. Tony was among the selectees for the Chief Warrant Officer program in later years. On July 4, 1986, he reported for duty at NAIAS, Memphis, Tennessee. He was supposed to relieve the food service officer assigned there, only to be told to his shock that they found his body floating in the river. He was killed for some unknown reasons. His body was chopped up and thrown in the Mississippi River a few months back. Tony was told not to go out of the base for his own safety. It was suspected that racial discrimination was the reason why the food service manager was killed, and since Tony's skin color was brown, he too might be killed. In spite of the unwelcome news, the job was a fresh start for him, and he again wanted to be at the top of his game. When Tony arrived, the general mess he took over was number 7 in ranking. He turned it around until it became number 1 in the Naval Air Station community. Soon enough, another crisis would call him home to San Diego. When the 21-unit condominium project he and his wife were building in National City in San Diego, California, was abandoned by its building contractor, Tony asked for an early transfer to San Diego to attend to the problem. As the story goes, he found out the building contractor had taken off with the construction money after assuring his wife that the project was going on smoothly to induce her to approve his requests for the release of funds. However, when the funds were exhausted, the contractor left before the project could be completed. It was a scam. With the $5 other building loan exhausted and the project abandoned, the money for the payoff, which was to come from the projected rental income, was now gone. Tony had no other alternative but to complete the project himself, otherwise he would be broke for life. Tony's transfer request was granted by the Department of Navy, and he reported immediately to the Coronado Naval Station, North Island, in San Diego, California. He was there from January 5, 1989 until his retirement on April 1 that year. Summarizing his Navy career, Tony started as a seaman recruit and quickly rose consistently to advance to the top enlisted rank and Master Chief Petty Officer in 15 years, the highest enlisted rank in the U.S. Navy. Careerists rarely attain this rank, and if they do, it usually takes well over 20 years of service. His many and varied accomplishments exposed him to food service and supply management, logistics, technical, and leadership skills he quickly attained. These accomplishments resulted in his selection for commissioning in the Navy Warrant Officers Program as U.S. Navy Supply Officer 4 in 1989. During that tenure of his active duty service, he received many accolades of naval commendation and Navy Achievement Medals. For Tony, it was an honor for him to have served the United States Navy for a total of 30 years, 11 days. He truly believes that if one served in the Navy honorably, he would be rewarded in return. After retirement, Tony and his wife Priscilla invested in real estate, buying houses and commercial buildings all over San Diego and around the world. Thanks to their business acumen, they accumulated enough wealth, which they used in putting up other businesses, making them one of the few Filipino-American multimillionaires in America. Billion-dollar venture that Tony Pizarro would someday own and manage a billion-dollar enterprise was the farthest thing in the minds of those who knew him when he was growing up poor and orphaned in Barangay Dang Balolo, Orion, Bataan. In 2005, Tony achieved exactly that success, defying the expectations of many. Although he only finished his high school education, could hardly speak the English language, and was so naive when he entered the U.S. Navy. He was scared and afraid to be near a phone because it might ring and he would be obligated to answer it. He thought the tall buildings in America were all churches and instinctively made a sign of the cross whenever he passed by them. He believed he was seeing a miracle whenever a television set would turn on by itself, unaware that it was switched on by remote control. But he was able to quickly adapt to his new environment by watching others do things and following their example. He studied and worked hard, taking advantage of career opportunities offered by the Navy. Each time he saw free courses and training opportunities, he would take them, knowing they would help elevate his position someday. In due time, he became an expert in his job, was appreciated and promoted through the ranks by his superiors. After 30 years, the little orphan boy had amassed a multi-million-dollar fortune, managed a billion-dollar enterprise, and was even giving away part of his fortune to help the less privileged people in the world. While still with the Navy, Tony already knew exactly what he was going to do when he retired. When he retired in 1989, Ronald Reagan was elected 45th President of the United States. His priority was to cut taxes, increase defense spending, and reduce nuclear arms. All this did not happen overnight. As he revamped the U.S. Armed Forces to be the best in the world, he opened up all contracting businesses and offered them to civilian contractors. To reduce spending, he took out military assignments, placing all warehousing jobs in the hands of civilians. The timing could never have been better for Tony's idea of establishing his own company, which he would name after his children, in response to the administration's cost-cutting initiatives. As these policies were implemented, he saw private contractors providing mess hall services to the Navy facilities and knew that he could do a better job. They provided personnel like waiters, line servers, storeroom clerks, and dishwashers of plates, cleaning utensils, tables, pots, and pans. While cooking was still done by the Navy, the contractors hired ensured that people were fed properly. To learn more about the business, he sought to study the details of the operations of a similar company. He had to execute his plan flawlessly, which meant that he first had to gain first-hand knowledge of all the government requirements for his business startup to operate. The opportunity came in the summer of 1990 during a wedding reception of a friend, when he met the owner of a company that did catering for the Navy. When the owner found out he was looking for a job, she hired Tony on the spot, aware of his qualifications and expertise. She appointed him as project manager at the dining facilities of the U.S. Naval Station on 32nd Street, San Diego. Tony looked at her company operation and introduced changes to improve its systems like employee scheduling. It made the owner happy because his ideas increased profits. Due to his superb performance, he was promoted to the position of Director of Operations of all her contracts at her main office in Del Mar, California, in just a few months' time. Naturally, I demanded a hefty increase, which I got. I noticed they were wasting a lot of man-hours that otherwise could be in her profit margins, he said. He trimmed the man-hours wasted, shuffled his crew, and reduced expenses. I turned the savings into additional profit. Because of me, the company won more contracts. I was sent to Hawaii in 1991, where we won 11 more contracts, and I helped set up their operations. When Tony returned to San Diego, California, he found out that an old friend with same expertise in Navy catering, Gary Lopez, not his real name, was back in town selling cars in one of the car dealerships in the Kearney Mesa area. Tony was now ready to execute his business plan and launch his own company. He sought to introduce Lopez to the company's owner as his replacement to manage the projects in Honolulu, Hawaii. A year later, in early 1991, when Tony thought he was ready to strike out on his own, he tendered his resignation. The owner didn't want him to resign. She was crying, even blocking her office door to prevent Tony from getting out of the building. His distraught employer even offered to double Tony's salary, but nothing could stop Tony. He was eager to depart, convinced it was time for him to test his wings. Tony searched for a suitable business partner for his firm. His first two choices turned him down, and he had to settle for his third choice. Filipino retired Chief Warrant Officer of the Navy Supply Corps, Jose Marquez, not his real name, living in Chula Vista, California. The two invested $15,000 each to create a startup fund with 50-50 equal partnership. They both agreed to use Tony's 4,000 SFAF commercial building on Market Street in San Diego, California, as the new firm's headquarters for free until the company made a profit. He also mentioned to Marquez that they didn't have to worry about rentals and future funds as they could borrow money from his physician wife, Priscilla. They drafted the articles of incorporation and both agreed on the company's name. They procured a business license and the necessary permits to conduct a logistics business and bought telephone and fax machines. Tony's plan was to win $1 million worth of contracts a year so that in 5 years they would have $5 million in contracts to manage. From the profits, they would procure real estate assets. From these humble beginnings, the partners were eventually able to win over $1.5 billion worth of contracts. Because of the uncertainty of the venture in the beginning, Tony engaged in other side businesses like a restaurant and a travel agency. However, his concerns proved to be unfounded because eventually the company turned a profit. Their firm would bid for government projects that required their services, and most of the time, they won. My standard formula was to bid 10% lower than the budget for the job, he revealed. Because of our long-time experience with the Navy, we knew where to cut costs and make money. The business venture, which started with a small janitorial contract serving the border offices of the Immigration and Naturalization Services, eventually attained unprecedented growth that peaked with the U.S. Navy Inter-Service Supply Support Program, SOP, and employed over 1,600 personnel. At one time, the company was in several locations nationwide, including the U.S. Naval Station, Great Lakes, IL, managing over 50 facilities, maintaining inactive ships in reserve for the U.S. Navy, and doing construction works for the Department of Veteran Affairs in California and Hawaii. Sometimes we would open several contracts at the same time, Tony recalled. I would bring my own manager and hire people, but I don't hire troublemakers. Normally, the contract is for 5 years. When it lapsed, we didn't rebid because it had become too competitive. He shepherded the company, constantly attaining success in all its projects. He and his company were endorsed by then-Congressman Bob Filner, CA 50th District, to be selected for the Lifetime Achievement Award given by the Asian American Business Roundtable in November 2006 in Washington, D.C. Tony remembered an incident in their janitorial contract with the Border Patrol in San Diego. Since it was one of their first projects, he made sure everything was done correctly and right by assigning himself as the lead worker working with his crew in cleaning up the premises. He prepared a daily working schedule, bought all the cleaning supplies and material needs. Sometimes he would show his crew how to clean the toilets himself. At the end of the first month's service, he looked for the head of the facility to hand him the first service invoice. He was led to the commanding officer, who recognized Tony. "Aren't you the one of the janitors cleaning toilets here?" "Yes," Tony replied, and told him his name. "I am here to collect for our janitorial services rendered." "If I remember, Pizarro is the owner of the company," the officer noted. "Yes, that's me," Tony introduced himself. "I was here every day to make sure we do a good job." As he was walking out with the payment check, Tony whispered, "By the way, if you have any problems with my crew, please do not hesitate to give me a call." He then handed him his business card. The officer was surprised. "Congratulations," he said. "I admire you. You will go a long way." As the Filipino saying goes, the officer spoke with the tongue of an angel, nagdilang angel. His prophetic words came true as Tony Pizarro, the bold but humble entrepreneur, turned out to be an outstanding success. Like a cat with 15 lives, that Tony de Leon Pizarro encountered more than his share of obstacles in life is very much evident by now. While other people ordinarily have 1 or 3 obstacles to surmount, Tony had about 15, some career, others life-ending pitfalls. For a start, he was born at the wrong place at the wrong time. His birth province, Bataan, was the epicenter of atrocities committed by the invading Japanese Imperial Army against the Filipino people and their soldiers. Life was cheap in the area, where hundreds of killings were committed each day. The chances of surviving the war in Bataan, compared to the other parts of the country, was little. Tony and his family were lucky to come out unscathed, although his own mother fell victim to malaria and died. His mother's early death was another tragedy Tony had to contend with. He was only 4 years old when she passed away, leaving him with no motherly care and support. For a child to survive with a mother is difficult enough. For one to be able to do so without one is almost impossible. Imagine Tony at 4, barely able to talk and ask for his needs or comprehend things. He must have been ignored by the adults in the household, as they too had their own responsibilities to carry and problems to solve. This was intensified by the fact that the family was poor and there was not enough food to share around. Another obstacle Tony had to contend with was the marriage of his father to a widow with 6 children of her own to take care of. This increased the mouths to be fed, further diluting his father's already meager income and dividing his share of fatherly love and family resources. Tony Pizarro would have not grown to adulthood had he not survived 2 critical events in his life. During the war, the Japanese soldiers were looking for his father on suspicion he was helping the Filipino and American guerrillas in the hills. His father hid in the closet, holding the 4-year-old Tony while covering his mouth. If he cried or made any noise that might lead to their discovery by the Japanese soldiers who were then searching the house, his father was ready to suffocate him to death. He was ready to sacrifice his son rather than leave his 5 remaining children fatherless. Luckily, Tony did not make any noise. His life thus spared, he now gives hope to other lives. Life-threatening incident. Another life-threatening incident was when he went swimming with friends in the summer of 1956 next to a sunken Japanese tanker left by the Japanese Army during the Second World War on the ocean in front of their hometown in Orphan, Bataan. While swimming in the choppy waters, Tony passed just inches away from the ship's razor-sharp motor blade. It was a miracle of God he went a different direction. He could have died had he hit the blade, but during that particular event, God was looking after him. He was not meant to die after all. If one is a betting man, one would have given Tony little chance to become a success, given his destitute condition at this point of his life. But the setbacks also galvanized Tony's resolve to hone the skills he would use as an effective tools to achieve his goals in life. When he was sent to the care of his aunt and her family in Rosario, Cavite, he learned how to become self-reliant and to live harmoniously with other people outside of his family. He learned to contribute to the day-to-day survival of the family by taking on added responsibilities unasked, like babysitting the younger children of his Aunt Liwanag and doing other household tasks by fetching water the family would need. He realized, at an early age, that he could not depend on other people to take care of him. He could not indulge himself with the luxuries of life, for his family was poor. He could not afford not to spend his waking hours contributing to the family's need, and more importantly, he understood early on that he must take advantage of all the opportunities given him to make a success of himself. Thus, he studied hard, even if sometimes he would go to school on an empty stomach. With his inborn intelligence, perseverance, and hard work, Tony did well in high school. He was elected class president each year of his class and the most serviceable person of the year in 1956. From 1957 to 1958, his senior year, Tony was elected president of the Student Council and handpicked as the school's battalion commander of its Preparatory Military Training (PMT) program. He was also with the school's champion debate team as well as the winner of the oratorical contest. His winning piece? The José Rizal's classic poem, My Last Farewell. Even when he was applying for the U.S. Navy, Tony encountered problems that would have snuffed out his storied military career. He almost did not pass his personal interview, as the interviewer declared him unfit to join the U.S. military and was in fact told he failed and told to leave. But Tony would not let that misunderstanding scuttle his dream. He did not leave as ordered and argued his case. "You asked me what I have inside my pocket, and I answered, handkerchief," he protested as he pulled out the handkerchief from his pocket. The interviewer thought he was guessing. One incorrect response would have doomed Tony's life forever. But Tony was not born to give up that easily. The stakes for him were so high that he would not let a simple misinterpretation of his response ruin his future. He wanted to show his willingness to do anything to pass and his aggressiveness to get in the Navy. The interviewer realized Tony was indeed right. He was amazed at the applicant's confident and quick response to the question. Tony, the respectful but bold aspirant, could indeed comprehend the English language correctly. With great relief, Tony was given another card, ordering him to report back the following Monday, March 3, 1959, for his physical examination. Only 10 were supposed to be allowed in. Tony was the 11th, as they made an exception to their rule. Despite passing all the tests with flying colors, Tony's admission to the U.S. Navy suffered another setback. His father, still hanging on to the impossible dream that it was his last chance to have a child of his own, obtain a college degree, a medical degree in fact, refused to sign the papers that would allow him to join. Only through the patient pleadings of Tony's Aunt Isabel did his father realize that the dream was impossible to achieve, as he did not have the financial means to support his son's education. Even when he was already in the U.S. Navy, Tony's success was not yet guaranteed, as he faced more obstacles. One was when he was court-martialed, as a result of his decision to put fresh paint on the mess hall building. The problem was that the paint job turned the building pink, as a result of mixing the free cans of paint Tony gladly accepted and put to good use. He did not know about the Naval Facility Manual that mandated approved colors for government buildings. He pleaded guilty to the charges, although he meant no malice. That alone would have ended his Navy career and halted his eventually rise to financial success, but for some reason he was transferred to a new assignment. He later surmised that his superiors, pleased with his exemplary performance, wanted to hide him from the investigators of the pink paint fiasco. While Tony was stationed aboard the USS Proteus, AS-19, in December of 1987, he became a victim of a shipboard fire, with the threat of being subjected to a court-martial confronting him. Again, it almost ended his naval career. After 6 months of constant scrutiny, the truth came out in the end. The blame was placed on the shoulders of an engineering officer for not following instructions. But that was not the end of Tony Pizarro's problem, as he had another obstacle to hurdle. At that time, it was a practice of servicemen to request for picnic supplies on weekends like food items and other materials. It was found there were a lot of items missing. Tony, as food service officer, released the items to them, but not without the signed permission of his superior. All that time, Tony held on to the logbook. It was his lifeline. He planned to use it as evidence to show he had the signed approvals from his superiors of his actions. He kept it secretly, not telling anybody about it. But before he was able to do so, he was told he was exonerated. The board found out he was not responsible for the missing supplies, since the final approval rested on his superiors who signed the requests. Tony would have continued with his naval career had he not been forced to retire to personally attend to his 21-unit condominium project he and his wife were building in National City after it was abandoned by its building contractor. Had he not retired, Tony would have lost millions of dollars worth of investments that would have made him the poorest retiree in San Diego. Again, God saved him from his troubles as Tony finished the project himself, even though he did not have the skills and experience in construction. His retirement did not mean that the obstacles he would have had to surmount would be over. In 2005, he discovered his business partner, Jose Marquez, with the help of the company's comptroller, Robert Gloria, misappropriated $1.3 million in company funds at the same time he was building a mansion in the Philippines. Among other things, Tony was not told about this. Tony successfully sued them and recovered some of the stolen money. Had he not discovered the treachery on time, his hard-earned investment in the company would have gone to naught. Finally, Tony had to overcome the last obstacle to his success before he retired from business. One of his trusted officers, Gary Lopez, sued his company with 12 allegations to include fraud, breach of promise, old age discrimination, among other things. Lopez came to the trial armed with some of the best lawyers in San Diego, including one who ended up as judge of the Superior Court. "We were worried about this case, as it was not a slam dunk," Tony recalled. "It was a matter of whom to believe, as there is no hard evidence to present." "There's so much at stake at the trial," said Tony. "If I lose, I would lose everything. All the things I worked hard for years would be gone. I would be the poorest guy in San Diego." Lopez brought so many allegations that each would have carried substantial financial punishments enough to wipe out Tony's assets. "Although the trial has long been over, I would not mind dragging his name again because there was so much at stake. He brought my dad to the brink of bankruptcy," said Tony's son Gerard, who served as the secondary lawyer. In the end, the truth prevailed and Tony was exonerated. Had he not been able to outsmart and outlast the smallest of these 15 obstacles in his life, Tony would not be the success he is today. But he is an extraordinary man of strong fiber, willing to persevere and do the hard work. At all times, he has shown himself to be eager to face and overcome the challenges life would throw at him, willing to volunteer for new assignments and use all the opportunities that came his way. "Each day that I survived, I thank God for my success," Tony confessed. "Some of the lessons I learned and the character-molding techniques that I believe must be followed are: 1. Must be disciplined, consistent, ambitious, have integrity, honest, fair, creative, willing to climb the highest mountains, courageous, know the art of giving back, thankful, and have strong belief in God, country, and family." Tony De Leon Pizarro should know these secrets to success. He practiced them to become the successful businessman and philanthropist he is today. Still, a lingering question prevails. Even with a strong character and determination, how was he able to surmount these 15 seemingly impossible to overcome obstacles in life? The faithful could only point to the angelic guidance of his mother in heaven, who died when he was only 4 years old, and whose face he could not remember, as she did not leave him even a single photograph. Graduation speaker message to the youth. In April 1, 1995, Tony Pizarro was invited by his high school principal and cousin, Mrs. Josefa A. Simeon, to be the guest speaker at the graduation ceremonies of his alma mater, Jose Rizal Institute, in Orphan, Bataan, Philippines. One of the policies of the school for many years, which we have been faithfully following, is the selection of a successful alumnus in his own field of endeavor to be the guest speaker on graduation day, she wrote Tony in her letter of invitation. This policy is being practiced with the hope that the speaker will serve as an inspiration to the new graduates. In this connection, and with a firm belief that you will no doubt inspire them, the candidates for graduation, class 1994 to 1995, we are extending to you our sincerest invitation to be their guest speaker come April 1, 1995 at 5 p.m. in the school campus. Tony gladly accepted the offer and traveled to the Philippines for the special occasion. Below is his inspiring speech, which sums up the story of his life. Tony De Leon Pizarro's speech. Good afternoon, distinguished guests. Mrs. Josefa Simeon, Principal, Jose Rizal Institute Teaching Faculty, graduating class of 1995, students, family relatives, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I have flown for over 18 hours and traveled over 10,000 miles to be here with you today. I am truly honored and privileged to be your guest speaker for this memorable graduation day. 36 years ago today, I sat where you are sitting now. I look at your faces and see my class of 1958. I look across the courtyard and recall both the difficult and fond memories of my time at JRI. I walked to school for miles only with the basic needs in life, the clothing on my back with the sandalias, slippers on my feet, because my family could not afford to buy us a pair of shoes and other luxuries in life. Yet we learned even more how to appreciate the simple things in life. I was not lucky enough to have the love, support, and encouragement from parents during my childhood. In my humble beginnings, I grew up as the youngest of 7 children, moving around from house to house and living with different families, because my mother had passed away when I was only 4 years old. But during those years of hardships, I became strong, efficient, independent, mature, and always unquestionable, seeking a quest for a better life. I also have fond memories of my teachers, Mrs. Simeon, who is Ate Peppa, my English teacher who taught our class words like analogy, that the opposite of bride is groom, which led me to believe that the opposite of brides is maid, which I always thought are 2 different people. Perhaps it is in my 4th year that I recall the best years of my life in high school. Possessed with the spark of leadership, creative ability, and self-confidence, I was voted to be the president of the student body and handpicked to become the battalion commander at Jose Rizal Institute. It was an auspicious beginning of my life. My ability to show leadership, demonstrate my organizational skills, and become an effective leader for others to follow blossomed. Life is a journey. Today, I would like to inspire you by walking with me through the cavalry of my life, full of obstacles, pain, agony, suffering, laughter, and happiness, and leave you with thoughts that someday my success will come true to you in your lifetime. It was 36 years ago today when I left Orion, Bataan, to go to a foreign country, America, and report for duty at the United States Naval Training Center in San Diego, California. It was at that significant moment that I began my life's global experiences. I was very young and very lucky indeed to be able to enlist in the United States Navy, for which I am forever grateful. I was by record one of the token few to start from the lowest and reach the highest rank as an enlisted man in a very short span of time of 16 years. I have had the most challenging duties imaginable in my naval career. In view of my proven toughness, aggressiveness, and continued superior performance, I was commissioned to become a Naval Supply Corps officer in 1979. It was in the summer of 1980 when I went through 6 months of rigorous academic training with very little time to prepare. Unknown to me, I was being sent to a school together with the graduates of the United States Naval Academy, the officer candidate schools, and different prestigious universities across the nation. Compared to them, I was just a high school graduate from Jose Rizal Institute, with barely a year in college. It was a record that remains unchallenged today. It manifested my steadfast will to graduate from the Navy Supply Corps School at Athens, Georgia, and my desire to be the best from others. Banking heavily from my wealth of experience as a former enlisted man, coupled with personal gut, instinct, and drive, I put myself head and shoulders above my peers, while surmounting all the hardship of an academician. In my 5th month in school, I was again handpicked to take over a Navy supply support logistics operation in a small island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia. My schooling was short of 1 month, but in view of problems on hand, I was exempted from my final exams, not knowing I was to recruit Filipinos in the Philippines for manpower support of our mission. Now, in 1995, I ran a fast-growing services company, and today, you have just accomplished an important step in your career. The sweetness and the ecstasy of today's success for each and every one of you will be the core of the next stage of your education. This is where the struggles start and your challenges in life begin. However, the framework, values, and the principles you have learned in this institution of higher learning, JRI, will lead you to fulfill your destiny. To attain success, achieve, and fulfill your dreams, you must have a strong commitment, determination, and faith in yourself. Let no one discourage you from obtaining the rewards you rightly deserve through hard work. Let no one impede the pathways leading to your goals. Instill pride in yourself by always setting commendable standards of performance. So, graduates of our beloved alma mater, the Jose Rizal Institute, remember that I am a living example of that testament. Remember that your dreams can come true in your lifetime. For I was just like you many years ago sitting in those chairs. At this time, I would like to acknowledge my family and the recipients of this year's awards from our Santos Pizarro Scholarship Foundation. This foundation aims to give an opportunity to other deprived students who could not afford to finish high school and continue their educational endeavors, so that someday he or she can become shining examples for others to follow. At this time, I would like to present them to you. When I graduated from high school, I did not have the opportunity to continue my college education due to lack of funds. I promised myself then that my children will reap the fruits of my labor and make sure they will get the best quality education available. To date, I am proud to announce my children's educational achievements. Both are well exposed to travel and have lived and visited Europe and Asia as well as all over the United States. My oldest son, Gerard Pizarro, 28 years old, is now a practicing lawyer in San Diego. In 1992, he obtained his Juris Doctorate degree from the Western State University in San Diego, California, and passed the California bar exams on his first try. He also has attended the following universities while pursuing his bachelor's degree in law: University of San Diego, University of California in Los Angeles, and American College of Switzerland in Lausanne, Switzerland. My daughter, Wendy Mae Pizarro, is 24 years old and is currently completing her second year at Harvard Law School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She will be graduating next year for her Juris Doctorate degree. Wendy completed her bachelor and master's degree in political science at Yale University, where she graduated magna cum laude in 1992. Upon graduation, she accepted a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship to attend Oxford University at Oxford, England, and graduated with a second master's degree in British Commonwealth history. While in high school, she was sent by her school to study for a semester at Granada, Spain, and had witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall in the summer of 1991. As I have instilled in my children the importance of education, I also hope that they will also inspire young people to pursue their studies and careers. As they have thanked me every Father's Day, now I should also thank the people who have influenced and supported me in my life. There are many I must thank, for I cannot ever forget where I came from. First, I would like to thank God for providing me through the years with good fortune, my parents for creating me, my Auntie Isabel and Auntie Liwanag, who recently passed away, and who had taught me values and wisdom, and to my sister Ida, who helped me grow up through the years. I would also like to thank my family, especially my loving wife who could not be here today, Dr. Priscilla Santos Pizarro, a practicing physician in San Diego. She was born in Wawa, Orion, Bataan, graduated from Arellano Elementary School, attended high school at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila, and subsequently completed her Doctor of Medicine degree at UST. My son, Gerard, and my daughter, Wendy, also could not be here today due to other legal commitments. Last but not least, I would like to thank my school teachers for giving me insight and academic exposure. Without them and their abilities to teach me, I will not be standing in front of you today. Remember, graduates, the fundamental ingredients of success: self-motivation, determination, self-discipline, self-empowerment, courage, and wisdom. But the most importantly of all is education. Stay in school as much as possible and always strive for personal excellence. Don't lose any hope, for the quitter never wins and the winner never quits. Education must be accompanied with a strong faith in God. I encourage you to take risks and learn from all your mistakes with the hope that you never make the same mistake again. Thank you for inviting me to be your honored guest speaker today. May the Lord be with you always. Good luck. Mabuhayang Pilipinas. Mabuhayang Filipino. Tony Pizarro, 58, 1995, graduation speaker, Jose Rizal Institute, Orion, Bataan.